What the Bible doesn't tell you: the mystery of the giants who survived the flood. The story begins in a world that feels almost impossible to imagine today, a world before the flood, before the waters covered the mountains, before Noah sealed the great door of the ark behind him. The Bible tells us that the earth had become filled with violence and corruption, but hidden among those ancient verses is a mystery that has puzzled readers for thousands of years. In the shadowy days before the flood, there lived strange beings known as the Nephilim, giants whose presence seemed to stretch beyond the ordinary boundaries of human history. Their footsteps echoed across the ancient world, and their legend was so powerful that even after the flood, their names refused to disappear. As the rain clouds gathered over the horizon, and as Noah faithfully prepared the ark according to God's command, one question remained unanswered. If the flood destroyed every living thing outside the ark, then how did stories of giants continue long after the waters receded? The Bible itself appears to present a mystery. In the book of Genesis, the Nephilim are mentioned before the flood, yet centuries later, when the Israelites approached the Promised Land, giant tribes were still there. The descendants of Anak, the Rephaim, and other towering warriors appeared throughout the biblical narrative. It is as though the flood washed away an entire world, yet somehow left behind traces of these enormous figures, like shadows refusing to fade with the passing of time. For generations, scholars, theologians, and curious readers have searched for answers hidden between the lines of Scripture, asking whether the giants survived through Noah's family, whether another mysterious event occurred after the flood, or whether the truth has been concealed within ancient traditions forgotten by most of the world. Tonight, we begin a journey into one of the Bible's most fascinating enigmas, following clues scattered across ancient texts, legends, and sacred history. And if you enjoy uncovering these forgotten mysteries of Scripture, consider subscribing to the Bible Chronicle, because in the next part, we will explore the strange identity of the Nephilim themselves, and why their existence frightened the ancient world more than the coming flood. To understand how the mystery of the surviving giants begins, we must first return to the earliest mention of them in Scripture. Deep within the opening chapters of Genesis, just before the account of the flood, we encounter a brief passage that has inspired centuries of debate. It speaks of the sons of God, who saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and took them as wives. Then comes the startling statement: there were giants in the earth in those days. The verse appears almost like a fragment from a forgotten story. A doorway briefly opened before quickly closing again. Yet behind that doorway lies one of the most mysterious questions in biblical history. Who were these sons of God, and what connection did they have to the giants known as the Nephilim? Ancient Jewish traditions offered an answer that was both fascinating and unsettling. According to texts preserved outside the Bible, particularly the ancient work known as the Book of Enoch, certain heavenly beings abandoned their appointed place and descended to earth. These beings were called watchers, guardians who were meant to observe humanity. But instead of watching, they became involved in the affairs of mankind. They taught forbidden knowledge, revealed hidden secrets, and according to these traditions, produced offspring who grew into mighty giants. Whether one accepts this interpretation or not, it is impossible to ignore how strongly it influenced ancient beliefs. To many people living in the centuries before Christ, the giants were not simply large humans, far from God's intended order. And so the stage was set for catastrophe, a world filled with violence, corruption, and beings whose existence seemed to blur the line between heaven and earth. The flood would come as an act of judgment upon that ancient generation, washing away kingdoms, cities, and memories beneath the rising waters. Yet here the mystery becomes even deeper. If the giants truly belonged to that lost world before the flood, then why do giant clans suddenly appear again many generations later? Were they somehow preserved through the judgment, or did the story begin anew after Noah stepped from the ark? The answer may be hidden within the descendants of Noah themselves, and in the next part, we will follow the bloodlines that emerged after the flood, searching for the first clues that suggest the giants may not have vanished at all. When the flood finally ended, the ark came to rest upon the mountains. And Noah's family stepped into a world washed clean by judgment. According to the biblical account, only 8 people survived. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. From these few survivors, every nation of the post-flood world would eventually emerge. At first glance, the mystery seems solved. If only Noah's family remained alive, then surely the giants must have disappeared forever beneath the waters. Yet as we continue reading the biblical record, an unsettling detail begins to emerge. Generations after the flood, long after Noah had passed away, stories of enormous people once again appear among the nations. This has led some researchers and ancient commentators to focus their attention on the family lines that left the ark. One theory suggests that although Noah himself was described as righteous and blameless in his generations, the wives who entered the ark may have carried ancestral connections unknown to us. The Bible does not provide detailed genealogies for Noah's daughters-in-law, leaving a silence that has inspired endless speculation. Others reject this idea entirely, arguing that Scripture offers no direct evidence for such a conclusion. Yet the question remains, how can giant tribes emerge in later centuries if every trace of the earlier giants had truly vanished? The silence of the text becomes almost as mysterious as the words it contains, inviting readers to search carefully between the lines. As the descendants of Noah spread across the earth, building cities, establishing kingdoms, and repopulating the nations, whispers of giant clans slowly returned to the historical record. Names such as the Rephaim, the Emim, and the Anakim would eventually appear, towering figures who inspired fear wherever they were encountered. Their arrival feels almost like the return of a forgotten shadow from the world before the flood. Were these tribes connected to the ancient Nephilim? Or were they something entirely different? The Bible offers clues, but rarely complete explanations. And in the next part, we will travel into the lands of Canaan itself, where Israel's spies came face to face with giants whose appearance was so terrifying that seasoned men felt like grasshoppers in comparison. Many centuries after the flood, after Abraham had walked the dusty roads of Canaan, after Isaac and Jacob had carried forward the covenant promises, the descendants of Israel finally approached the land God had prepared for them. Standing at the edge of the promised land, Moses sent 12 spies to explore the territory ahead. For 40 days they traveled through valleys and mountains, observing cities, crops, and powerful nations. When they returned, most of their report was encouraging. The land was fertile, rich, and overflowing with abundance. But then their voices grew heavy with fear. And they spoke of something that sent shockwaves through the camp of Israel. The spies described encountering the descendants of Anak, a people of extraordinary size and strength. Their words have echoed through history ever since. They declared that they had seen giants in the land, and that beside them, they felt like grasshoppers. Imagine the scene for a moment: hardened men who had crossed deserts, witnessed miracles, and survived countless hardships, suddenly overwhelmed by terror at the sight of these towering warriors. Whether their description was entirely literal, partly exaggerated by fear, or a mixture of both, the impact was undeniable. The hearts of the people melted. The promise of the land seemed to vanish beneath the shadow of the giant standing before them. Yet this moment creates an even greater mystery. These giants were not described as isolated individuals, but as established tribes living across the region. They possessed cities, territories, and long histories of their own. The Anakim were not alone. Ancient records within the Bible also mention the Rephaim, the Emim, and other giant peoples scattered throughout the lands east and west of the Jordan. Who were they really? Were they descendants of the same mysterious beings mentioned before the flood, or simply unusually large human clans whose reputation grew with every generation? The biblical narrative leaves the question hanging in the stillness, like an ancient riddle waiting to be solved. And in the next part, we will uncover the fearsome Rephaim, a race of giants whose legacy became so powerful that their very name was remembered long after their kingdoms had vanished into history.